Today with my friend Tasha Darwent. Tasha is a therapeutic mentor, a wellness coach, somebody who helps and supports individuals and their families who are navigating through a lot of mental and emotional challenges like anxiety, depression, PTSD, eating disorders, and addiction, as well as physical issues such as chronic illness, gut problems, brain function complications, and autoimmune diseases. Well, there's so much I want to say about Tasha, but the main reason I have her here today is because I believe Tasha has a very powerful story to share with all of us, which is a story, a journey of healing addiction, eating disorder, autoimmune disease, digestive problems, and I'm sure many other things that we're going to learn together as we go in this journey recording this episode. So Tasha, welcome. So good to have you here.
Thank you so much. So good to be here.
Yeah, and we share such a passion to empower people to heal. And I can assume and say this with certainty that you and I have a deep belief, not just belief, but a knowing, a conviction in our hearts that every single person has the power to heal themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the reason I have you here on Rebranding God is because I'm very curious about your story. I remember when I met you through the community, right? Maybe 10, 12 years ago. And you had a look. And all I thought when I saw you was, wow, this woman is hurting a lot. She's just hurting a lot. And we are not, close friends at that time to have conversations about what was going on, but I just noticed. And then 2-3 weeks ago, I saw you in a friend's house and you had a new look. You were shining, you were bright, you were walking taller, your eyes just had something very different, like you were very alive. So I got curious and I approached you, and of course you healed many conditions. So I'm going to start this episode today by going straight to the big question here. Tell us first some of your major health issues that you had, mm-hmm. and how your health issues were connected with trauma, mm-hmm. childhood trauma. Mm-hmm. So let's begin.
Yeah, all right, just getting right to the big stuff here, Alex. So some of my major issues were major GI issues. It started with just kind of general inflammation and discomfort and bloating and gas and all the kind of things we hear out there going on so often these days. And then things got progressively worse with my gut. And that's quite a long story, but essentially things progressed to like what seemed to me like celiac. Anytime I would eat any gluten, I just got sick for like 16 to 24 hours, just on the floor until it was completely out of my body. I was just really, really sick. So I could see that my body was kind of consistently upping the ante of its messages to me around some major disturbance going on. And it didn't really surprise me much that it was to do with my gut, since I had such challenges with eating and nourishing myself and eating disorders and trauma, and how much fight or flight is kind of related to all of that. Mm-hmm. So that was one major challenge. Another one was women's health issues. I had reoccurring ovarian cysts, and at some point I ended up having an ovarian cyst surgery. Actually I had surgery on my gut twice and surgery on my right fallopian tube and a right ovarian cyst that wrapped around my fallopian tube and created torsion. So I had to get the fallopian tube taken out, the cysts there, and they found endometriosis. Mm-hmm. So I had really painful periods for a very long time, it was really rough, and I found no real support from the Western doctors besides surgery on any of these fronts. And the gut surgeries I ended up having were two major gut surgeries where they cut out. One was 8 inches of my intestines, and another time was 10 inches. And I had dead bowel, and I, almost died. I would say several times.
Wow. And what age?
It was 2009 when I got the ovarian cyst. Was my first surgery. So gosh, what was I? I was in my younger 20s.
Move your microphone a little more in the center. Yeah.
Okay.
So there you go.
Yeah.
Perfect.
I was in my younger
So your 20s.
Uh-huh.
Wow.
Yep, so that's when that started, and the gut surgery started in 2015. And so after, I had 2 surgeries in 2015, and then I was just hospitalized pretty consistently with bowel obstructions, and kind of going through the routines of, I knew what to do at that point to try to avoid more surgeries if I could, because the more surgeries you get, the more scar tissue you have, and the more bowel obstructions you get. And all the Western doctors could tell me was, we don't know why this is happening. It could be genetic, right? And the only thing we can offer you is a low residue diet, which is basically void of any nutrients, and surgery, right? And so I went into the hospital many times knowing I had to try to avoid surgery, and what I could do to do that, regardless of what the surgeons were telling me, which was I probably would have had maybe a total of 10 bowel surgeries if I had had surgery every time I was admitted and they said I needed it.
So basically they were telling me, we don't know what's wrong with you, and they kept just doing surgeries, just kind of treating the symptoms versus really investigating the root.
Totally.
Yeah.
And there's a point where with those kinds of things, it does become an emergency.
Yeah.
It is life-threatening.
Yeah.
So with those 2 surgeries I had, there was no way I could get around it.
Yeah.
But the other ones, I learned basically how to get around it. They would put I don't know if you want these details, but they would put a gastric tube up your nose called an NG tube when you have a bowel obstruction.
Wow.
Because you can't eat, you can't drink, and you get really nauseous and sick because your body's trying to get rid of whatever is in it, right? And so it can also lift the obstruction, so there's not as much pressure on the twist in the intestines. So they put a tube down your nose into your stomach to suck these fluids and remaining particles out. Lots of pain medication because it's very, very painful. Fluids, because you can't drink or eat anything. And then you just kind of, try to wait out your time until hopefully the obstruction lightens up. And that's what would happen every time. Sometimes I felt like it was prayers that got me out of it. Other times, I'm sure God was often involved, but other times it just felt like somehow by fortune, I got out, and then I would just kind of be seeking answers, right? And that's really when, in 2009 is also when the chronic brain issues started.
Yeah, talk about the brain. What was happening in your brain kind of at the same time or after your surgeries?
Yeah, so this is the symptom and sort of category that has been the hardest for me. And I realize why, and it's because, the brain is our switchboard, right? The brain, I have heard that our soul rests in the area of our brain. And when these brain issues started happening to me, I was already on a pretty, a deep healing path for myself. I had kind of learned some things and realized I'm a being of light, and I'm here to reconnect to that light and heal this trauma and heal this forgetting of who I am. And I had, a very specific daily practice I would do to kind of care for these parts of myself and come back to that light. And so when I started experiencing these brain challenges, it felt like the light just went off.
Wow.
And I was really scared. I felt like I was, like I had dementia. I was forgetting where I was. My mom could probably recall me calling her many times, just completely, terrified because I felt like I was losing my mind. I couldn't see clearly. So for me, it really messed with my cranial nerves and my ocular nerves, and I was dizzy. I had vertigo. It felt like I was looking through a snow globe. I had migraines, and I really couldn't remember things. And along with these symptoms came like a lot of anxiety and depression, you know, and so, you know, all of that started, and then it started my search of seeing all kinds of doctors, both like alternative and conventional, to really try to start to find some answers.
Wow.
Yeah.
So many places I want to go. So let's continue this journey. Like, you had emergency surgeries with all these gut issues and no doctors could figure out what was happening. Then you start having some pretty significant brain issues, like very young age, dementia, migraines, forgetfulness, a lot of anxiety and depression. So at what point you realize that the Western medicine was not give you the answers, right? And at what point did you realize, okay, all these conditions, all these symptoms cannot just be physical?
Yeah.
Because it sounds like you were in a search too. So when did you start realizing there is a deep emotional component underneath all this, these conditions in my body? So walk us through a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually where I had come from was kind of this place of knowing for quite a number of years the deep emotional impact of my trauma and different elements of childhood and kind of chronic PTSD and chronic eating disorder stuff, and addiction and mental health challenges. You know, I had been in 3 different recovery centers for disordered eating.
Okay.
And before this point in my life. And so it started from, you know, when I was 12, I was hospitalized for anorexia.
Okay.
You know, and so when that happens, you know, it takes a certain amount of, you know, facing that, at least to get out of the hospitals, you know. And I think when I was younger, that's kind of why I was doing it. You know, I just wanted to sort of be free, and I wanted to, well, one, not hate myself as much. You know, I wanted to kind of be friendlier and more kind to myself. I wanted to learn how to nourish myself, my body, mind, and spirit, you know, and I wanted to learn like why I felt all the really negative things about myself that I felt, and why I felt like I had to go to these behaviors as survival that were so punitive for so long, and I couldn't find my way out by myself, you know. So I knew these kind of components, and from a young age too, I started looking at Louise Hay material, and I really, when I was like in my upper teens at this point, I really connected to her material, which is all, as you know, about the metaphysical. You know, I was like, oh, what is this knee pain telling me about maybe where I'm stuck in my life, right? Like, this woman's work just studied people for 30 years and connected certain negative thought patterns with bodily sensations and conditions, and then, right, the positive affirmations to kind of counteract those. So I went into this with that knowledge, yet I think it was a very, how do I even explain it, kind of topsy-turvy kind of time for me, because actually for a very long time, and as I shared with you, I was really on that like path with my therapist and mentor, who had really guided me in the deepest way that I had been sort of met before, and kind of reminding me of who I really am and this soul's work that I'm here to do, to heal my childhood stuff, and to grow into this light and this potential, and so I had really actually worked on the emotional and the mental and the psychological and the trauma for a long time. And I had continued to do that work, actually, throughout this journey, to absolutely try to help me get to those root causes of why, right, these things were happening in my body. And it's like, I didn't need a doctor to tell me, why am I having reoccurring bowel obstructions, right? It's like, well, I've been anorexic and bulimic for a very long time, and my insides have literally been in knots because I have never felt safe in my body. And I've also, right, then all those physical actions you take when you're in that place behaviorally.
So let's share with the audience, because that you just touched a great point about not feeling safe in your body.
Yeah.
So let's help the people who are not very familiar with how our emotions, how stress, how being in a constant state of fight or flight can really change our physiology, make us sick. So how would you best explain the lack of safety that you felt, how that caused so much stress in your digestive system to a point that, of course, there's the eating disorder, right? So how you go from like, I don't feel safe at home because there's abuse going on at home and don't feel safe, to eating disorder, and then to have a lot of issues in your gut and your brain.
Mm-hmm.
How would you make that connection?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's, just when you live in an environment where you don't feel safe for various reasons, right? And that what starts to happen is that chronic fight or flight, right? And so when we go into fight or flight, we go into a sympathetic nervous state. And so when we're in sympathetic nervous state, we are in fight or flight, and the opposite of fight or flight, which is parasympathetic, is rest and digest. Right? So that simple fact right there, it just can really show for me in my particular journey how, these things kind of led together like a domino effect. Right? And so just in the sort of daily survival that I lived in, I was also chronically over-exercising. I was literally trying to run away from myself. I ran anywhere from 8 to 15 miles a day for years of my life. And, it was like both this crazy survival that like helped me manage my energies, not in a truly like helpful or functional way, in a maladaptive way, but it helped me survive.
Saved your life.
Right? It did save my life, and it also but it did both. It like helped me escape my body, but also like get back in my body. It's kind of hard to explain, but it was both. And so just years and years of living in that state of fear and feeling ashamed of oneself and being afraid of just what might be coming, and also experiencing sexual abuse from a young age from a neighbor that was living around us. These things, they just pile on top of one another, right? And so I think, does that answer your question?
I think if I can summarize, if I understood you right, and please correct me, you had constant situations at home in your environment that put you in that deep survival state where you didn't feel safe, and the stress was very high. And knowing trauma, I'm going to assume, but again, you correct me if I'm wrong, that you didn't have anybody there to support you, to hold, to help you regulate your emotions and help you to deal with all the stress that was going on. So that constant stress in your body caused a lot of, like you say, if you're not relaxed, you're not even digesting well, and the emotional component, like you said a few minutes ago, there's a lot of self-hatred there. So, which I'm sure is behind the eating disorders and exercising a lot. And usually when there's abuse, we can't help but to think that there's something wrong with us.
That's exactly it, and later what I learned is when we're 0 to 7, is when we take in and absorb, what becomes unconscious and subconscious, just everything going on around us, and we can oftentimes internalize that as whatever's going on around means that it's happening because I'm bad. Right? And and I think my mom was someone who was there, and I think that they're complex
sure.
dynamics, it's hard for me to talk about even because I love my family very, very much, and and my dad's no longer with us, but my relationship was most strained with my dad. And I've done a lot of work around that, but
no, thank you. And I know it's complex, and I always make it very clear in this healing journey. I work with clients that had a lot of trauma, and they have such a difficult talking about the trauma because they think they're in a way blaming the parents, judging the parents, and making themselves victim. And I'm always very clear that this is not about blaming the parents. It's simply facing the truth of what happened to you and stating the facts of what happened. And I always say, well, that happened in a healthy world. A child should always be nourished, loved, protected. A child should never be in the absence of love or protection or being abused or being neglected. And that happens in our world. So to me, it's simply stating the truth of what happened, and then you can take responsibility for your life and go through the healing journey, which sounds like you have been in healing your body and not being a victim of what happened to you in the past. And it happened, and I like to talk about it because it's a very common pattern that I see with a lot of people who had trauma. And let's clarify this word trauma a little bit, because trauma is not necessarily just sexual abuse or physical abuse or the death of a parent or being raised in poverty. Trauma, it can be simply a mother that's working full-time, a father that is constantly anxious, and even though you have food, you have shelter, you have a warm bed to sleep in, the child can still experience trauma, because if there's not the presence of an empathetic, emotionally available parent that is nourishing and nurturing the child, it can be trauma. And as I love to repeat what Dr. Peter Levine or Dr. Gabor Mate speak about trauma, it's not what happens to us, but it's what happens in our bodies in the absence of an empathetic presence.
That's really well said.
So some people like to say big T trauma, small T trauma. To me, it's all any experience that happens in our childhood that causes us to believe that we're not loved, that we're not enough, that there's something wrong with us. That creates imprints in the body, and we can call that trauma, because those imprints are going to cause us to develop beliefs, and from those beliefs we're going to develop compensatory behaviors. And a typical behavior that I see a lot in this community especially, it's high achievers, either through a lot of exercise or through work. It's like this constant need to be busy and always doing things. That to me is a trauma response, that kind of behavior. And we see a lot in our culture, and it's nobody's fault at the end of the day, because it's our system that needs to be correct. It's a complex subject. But just to go back to your story, Tasha, I think it would be helpful for the audience to hear from you, like when you start realizing, okay, all these conditions, my gut issues, my digestive issues, the brain issues, have to do with what happened to me as a child, not feeling safe, being always in a fight or flight. So for people who are in this journey, I mean, what is the start?
Where does it start?
Yeah, how do you start? Somebody who might be listening to this and say, oh my God, I have all these migraines and I know there's an emotional component, but I don't know what it is. Or I have constant digestive issues and I don't know what's causing. And because they just go into Western medical doctors who usually don't address, the body in a holistic way because of the system that they are they're in. So how do they start?
Yeah, so I think for me, this is where the story kind of brings in that piece of holistic health. And so, definitely tending to, and I can go into more detail about how I do that with individuals, but tending to the emotional elements in terms of like starting where they are, really. Like, okay, let's talk about, what are some underlying beliefs? What are some underlying core wounds? What's some patterning that you notice in terms of, thinking, feeling, and behaving? And we kind of start wherever they're at and wherever they're willing, right? And then I really like to kind of work backwards, and there's a specific like journaling exercise I'll have people do where they name their body sensations, they name their emotions. We're talking about for like a snippet of time, like a snapshot in time, whatever thoughts are present at that time, and then whatever memory comes up, because oftentimes at this point in that process, if people really sit with an open heart and say, okay, what memory from my younger life comes up here, then we will name that memory, and then we will go into that memory, and what happens is something really powerful, because what people can see is like, holy crap, I'm basically living from the age of 7 when I was programmed because this thing happened with my caretaker, and I live in my adult human body today, but with that same psyche as I did as a 7-year-old.
Yeah, good point.
And then we kind of will go through that and just name, okay, what were the body sensations there? What were the emotions? What were the thoughts? Right? And it can help people really connect to what happened to them wasn't their fault, right? And their interpretations and how we internalize how we're treated as a young child. If we don't dig deep into that stuff and look at it and bring healing to it, we just believe it, and we're basically big adults with very wounded children walking around the world. Right? And just replaying over it. That's what chronic PTSD is. Right? Just replaying all these things that happen that were stressful, that we haven't processed, we haven't fully felt, because we haven't ever felt safe enough to until we're in the presence of someone that can hold that and guide us. And then we can go back to those times and go back to that wound and say, I'm here now. I'm here now, little girl, to help remind you of the truth, and help honor your feelings and help reparent you now. And that's all of our responsibilities, I feel like, all of our opportunities,
And I'm going to add something to your beautiful sharing, which is, of course, if somebody is listening to this and they're sick, first take care of the physical sickness.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to get to.
So let's go there, because you and I are holistic coaches, and we know how important it's starting in the body first to make sure there's enough life force, there's enough energy, because then the motivation to heal comes from the energy, because we know it takes tremendous amount of energy to heal, to make changes. So we need to address anything that might be robbing the physical energy, right? So let's talk about that, totally. How you first address the body.
Yeah, and so that's the other piece that, and what I feel so passionate about in my work is really blending, say, using nutrition and supplementation, and really understanding where someone is at physically, and then filling out a health intake form and helping me understand, okay, what symptoms and conditions are you facing, right? Like, where is the inflammation, the tension, the chronic pain, the whatever is going on in the physical body. And for me, in the training I've gone through, hearing people's symptoms and conditions helps me understand, okay, what is the root of this on the physical level?
Yes.
And I think for me, that it took me a long time to finally find that was the medical medium information I found that helped me understand, okay, this isn't actually just emotional, just spiritual. And I tried for a long time to simply heal myself through meditation and visualization and
Oh, so you actually did the reverse.
I did the reverse.
So I'm going to interrupt you for a second, but this is such a good point. Because most people would just address the physical over and over and over and not address the emotional, the mental, and the spiritual. You did the opposite. You went to the spiritual aspect, and thought maybe you would heal yourself just through, if I meditate, I'm going to heal myself. So I love that. Thank you.
I did. I tried really hard.
But this is such a great point, because I love how you just say it's not just spiritual. It's not just it's not just any of those. We are a complex, holistic, complex and simple at the same time. But we're holistic, and we need to use all the aspects, right? The physical, the mental, the emotional, the spiritual. I was talking to a client today, for example, who tends to go so much to just the spiritual side of her healing, and I was emphasizing how important it's like you can't just go to your meditation and reach the cosmos, God, source energy, whatever you want to call it, great spirit, without actually going to the body and feeling what's in the body, because that is what we call spiritual bypassing. And I see a lot of people just using spirituality as a way to heal, but they're not feeling, and we seen the disaster that, I'm just going to mention, that can lead to a lot of spiritual narcissists, which in my opinion can become the most dangerous one. And of course we're talking the extreme of like cult leaders here and stuff like that. But I find that a lot of people, once they have that, they feel that connection with spirit, which is, it's delicious. I love that. It's very easy to just want to go to that place.
It's almost addictive.
Yeah, what's that?
It's almost addictive.
It's almost addictive. That can be an addiction itself. That can be a way to escape from the body. And would you agree that healing really, it will it's a paradox. It will happen in the level of the body, and at the same time, we don't become identified with the body.
Yeah.
I
know. That's why it can
both.
be so hard to understand.
It's both.
It's so both. And I think that's one of the biggest takeaways that I have looking back at my journey, and I think, I went on for so long, so probably from 2009 to like 2016, I was still seeking that physical help, seeing a lot of doctors, trying a lot of methods while doing my inner practices, my spiritual and kind of trauma work and therapy work. But I still felt like garbage. I still felt really bad. And, those tools, gosh, they gave me something. Yeah. They gave me something, but it also got to the point that it was so bad with my brain that the journaling exercises I would do, in fact, stopped serving me. Yeah. Because I didn't have enough kind of presence of mind and ability to like lean back from what I was journaling, or lean back from the shadow to like disidentify from it. So whatever I would journal, it was just like stuck to me. I was like, because my brain, I later realized, was so full of toxic heavy metals and viral neurotoxins and these true physical things that were happening, creating barriers to my light, essentially barriers to my clarity. That really kind of formulated the next step on my journey of like, okay, now these practices that once saved my life, are now becoming kind of prisons for me. Yeah. Because I was so rigid.
You were rigid.
My ego really took over my spiritual path.
Let's go there. This is juicy. I love talking about the ego, and I love talking about how the ego uses our spirituality, because the ego uses the things that we like a lot, the things that we get attached to, and the ego like, I'm gonna use this. So tell more about how your ego kind of used your spirituality and created that rigidity. Yeah.
I mean, so for about, maybe almost 6 years straight, I did this same practice, this journaling practice that I explained earlier. And at the end of it, there's like meditation and kind of qigong, and you bring in the light, and it was very structured. Yep. And it really served me for that time period, right? I needed that then. But what I saw was when I needed to become flexible and recognize that practice wasn't the ultimate, like, God. It was something that was only going to be useful for me to use if it was like a sign pointing at the moon. If it was like pointing me in the direction of my true self and source. But I had been my ego was so rigid, say with the over-exercising and the particular eating and the perfectionism, right? That my ego kind of came in the back door around my spiritual practice. And when I couldn't really do that anymore because of my brain, I felt like I was going through this crazy threshold of, I'm so ungrounded, I'm not okay, and the core disconnect I realized from my higher self is like this feeling of I'm bad and wrong and I'm not okay. When I'm not connected to my deeper self, that's the core wound that I think a lot of us have.
Yeah.
And so I recognized I was covering up this core wound with, I'm okay if I do this practice in this exact way and I'm perfect at it.
Yeah.
And when I couldn't do it, I really saw how much my ego was in control of, it became rote, it became something to kind of check off the list. I wasn't truly really in my body. I was just trying to get everything out so I could get an A and be a good girl, and that threw me for a frickin' loop, I will tell you, when I had to kind of stop and become flexible, which is a huge, huge thing we need to be able to do. And I certainly needed to be able to do that, to connect to the essence of what I was even doing in the first place. But man, it was a messy, to not do that practice, I felt like, wait, I don't have this lifeline, this, raft in the middle of a turbulent sea that I used for so long. What do I do now?
And that can be a very dark space, because I relate to what you're saying, because I was also that person, doing my meditations, doing my mindfulness practices, reading all the books, doing the courses, doing the breath work. And things were not moving in my life. Things are not changing. My thing was, I'm not successful enough. Why can I not be successful? And I'll read the books and they'll do these things, right? Which is, there's a dark side of the personal growth of the self-help industry that tells us, if we do all these things, you're going to be happy. If you do all these things, you're going to be successful. And it's BS. So I follow all those instructions, those books. And when things were not happening, I felt even worse about myself, because then I'm like, okay, I'm doing all the right things, like you said, I'm checking everything. I'm checking all the boxes, and nothing is working. I still don't have a relationship. I still don't have enough money. Something must be really wrong with me. And those moments are very dark. And at the same time, I want to share this because I want to see if you went through the same thing. It's almost like our methods need to fail us for us to get to that point where you say, I don't know what to do. In that moment, I even get goosebumps as I say, that moment that I just collapsed on this floor, I cried right here on this floor while we're recording, because nothing was working. And I went into despair, like, I don't know what to do. It was that moment that I surrendered, and I heard this voice that I'm going to call Grace, which to me is the voice of God, in my right shoulder that said, good, I'm glad you finally surrendered, because now we can help you. But it was almost like I needed to really let the ego go, because the ego is like, okay, if it's meditation, I'm going to meditate every single day. It's Qigong, I'm going to do Qigong every day, because I have that personality of I'm disciplined, I'm an achiever, all those things, like, tell me what to do and I'll do it. But it was always with the agenda, if I do these things, I will feel good enough. So that was the agenda. So did you go through something similar like that?
Gosh.
It's like you had to literally lose all your practices, lose your lifeline to finally say, I don't know what else to do.
Totally.
And what happened then?
Yeah. Well, I remember at this particular juncture, I was on Kauai, and I remember taking some space from my therapist and mentor at the time, and that was kind of like me taking space from this practice. That's the way I saw it. It didn't have to be that way, but that's the way I saw it. And I was out in the middle of this wild country, right, on the beach, where water was raging and wind was, and I was just like, I'm terrified, and I don't know. I don't know what to do. And I had grasped so much at sort of the knowledge, I think, that I had accumulated about understanding who I was, what was going to help me connect to who I was. I just needed to do this to do it. And then it was just like going through this threshold that opened me wide open and was scary as hell. But it was like this, it was also like this groundless, like there was some excitement because I knew something had to change. And it was like, you know, that crack where then like, then the light can come in again from you releasing the striving. Because the striving I was doing was just blocking me, you know, and it was like, wait, could this, it brought me back to my original days of kind of, when I was in my third treatment center, I found the book, or I was given the book, The Power of Now.
Oh yeah, one of the best.
That was that was my first major opening of like this point of just extreme suffering to then this recognition of like, that was the really only time where I felt like, I've never told anyone this, but like the energy of Jesus kind of came through one day, and I was like, I saw things clearly through the veil that was like nothing I had ever experienced, this peace beyond understanding, where I kind of just understood things for a little bit, like this.
Oh, I call that moment of miracle.
It was.
Yeah.
It was, and I haven't quite had a moment quite as profound as that yet again. But, you know, it was like this beginning of another way of deepening that I couldn't have deepened into if I didn't like throw my hands up and say, all right, all my attempts from my human self are not working. Yeah. Like something, show me some other way. And it took a lot of time still. Like I don't pretend that like that was like, oh, that happened, and then it was clear. It was a messy fucking thing, you know?
It is messy, friends. It's very messy. It's not like you had this mystical moment with Jesus Christ. I had a mystic moment with grace, and to me it's all the same. It's Christ consciousness, we can call. It's a mystical experience, and it's not like our life just changes completely at that moment. It's messy. Because then we still have to integrate, like you have this mystical experience which can happen through medicine journeys as well, or deep meditations, and then it's still like, then what? To integrate that experience into our everyday, it takes time, and it's not like our ego goes away, because the ego comes back, and the ego wants to bring those old behaviors, those old ways to like you said, let's strive. To these days, it's been years now in this journey, especially the last 3-4 years, but it's still, I have to watch myself certain days that I'm not striving, that I'm not making something happen, that I'm not pushing, because that's all part of the striving. And now I'm like, no, I don't make anything happen. I don't push anything. It's not me doing. I'm just sit, and I'm guided by source. I sit, it's like, okay, how can I be the most helpful today to the world? And really sitting in that space and being guided. But it's been taking years of that practice to finally surrender to this I don't know. But what I love about your story that I relate with so much is like that this place where we throw our hands up in the air and say nothing that I do in my human way is working, and that to me can be such a beautiful place of surrender, because we have really hard time surrendering.
Oh gosh, so hard.
Let's talk more about this Jesus energy, this spiritual energy, your connection. So what is your experience now, your practice? I know, I ask sometimes my guests how you define God, but it's almost like, how can you define what doesn't have form or even name? So when do you know you are connected with this light, with this energy? Let's start that. When do you know?
Yeah, so for me, what I have seen that brings me to that energy the quickest is actually going right to the pain that I have tended to want to avoid.
Wow, beautiful.
And so, I would say even more, my teacher taught me this for a long time. That's why I went and saw your first book that stood out to me was Radical Acceptance by Tara Brach, because that book has been like a Bible to me, you know. And in my earlier days, because I had so much perfectionism and so much striving, I sort of intellectually understood that I had to radically accept and like meet and embrace and be with really the shadow, the wounds, right? The forgetting. But in terms of energetically, truly surrendering to that inside my body, it took me quite a lot of time to really get to that place. And so, you know, now I've just seen through some powerful experiences that, wow, like, and I'll do the same practice sometimes, but I don't do it every day. But what I see is that I really do on a daily basis desire to show up for the pain inside of me and for the wounded self inside of me, which for me is there's still very much a scared little girl that's afraid of being punished. That's what I can see almost on a daily basis. And it's like, instead of, I used to wake up and be like, when is this going to go away? When am I going to have practiced this away enough, right? Which is a very unkind way to greet ourselves. It's a very unkind way if you had a kid coming up to you that was saying, mommy, I'm scared, I don't know what to do, and you said, just fucking get over it by now. Right? Like, what would happen? You know, nothing good. And so it's been like this. I had this clear meditation a couple weeks ago where I was really struggling in this moment, and I think I heard what you call grace. It was just like, go right to the pain. Like, go right to the pain. And that's when I feel this deeper, like motherly, loving, angelic kind of presence come through me that's so natural. I'm not trying. And it's not, the funny thing is, it's not from me avoiding the pain. It's from me going right to the pain.
I love this so much. I think you gave the best possible answer to that question, because you just said the quickest access to this light, to source, God, divine, whatever you want to call, is straight to the pain. And I love this because I learned this a few months ago when I was doing doing a meditation and really feeling the pain and just sitting with God's energy. And I realized something so profound at that moment, that I was like you, I was trying to just access God and doing a lot of spiritual practices without doing the proper reparenting, the inner child healing. So I was trying to, in a way, heal myself just by, using spiritual practices, until I start work with an incredible teacher that didn't let me get away with that. She taught me no, you need to feel your pain. You need to be there for that little girl in you. And then also studying with Dr. Gabor Mate helped me to really understand something profound, which is the inner child, that wounded child in us, holds the key to God, to source. That we cannot just go straight to source without bringing, when we bring her into, that was all that I saw in that deep meditation I had months ago. It's like when you tend to the little girl, to their wound, we release the pain, because the pain is being processed, is being seen, is being heard. And it's like we bring the inner child to the heart center, which is the fourth center. And then through the heart center is the portal to source. So the way I explain it is like, you're not just going to access God through your crown to the top. You can skip the heart center. That's why the heart is the fourth center. It's like we bring the child. If the child lives in the belly, if I'm going to illustrate, the child lives in the belly, which is the center of our emotions. We bring the child to the heart center. And when you get to face God, I never shared this in any podcast, and it might be too out there for some people, but I know that people who are ready to hear this, they're going to understand. When you have that child in your heart center and you face God with the child, that's heaven. The idea of heaven on earth, that's the kingdom. We enter the kingdom, but we need to bring her with us. And we become this integrated yeah. So, yeah, it's powerful.
Beautiful.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
I know you understand that.
I do. Yeah.
So, I think you and I are sharing a very powerful message to everyone there that there's no way out but through. And what it means but through, because I always like to take these spiritual messages and break it down. What does that mean? There's no way out but through. You said it. You have to go to the pain and feel it. And I don't recommend anybody to do this alone, because we had great therapists, coaches, teachers to walk with us in this journey until you're confident and you learn. But even now to these days, I see my teacher.
No, me too.
Yeah.
And it's necessary. It's, maybe the frequency changes or things ebb and flow,
the needs
but it's
change.
it's gosh, when I do, I'm like, gosh, I just really, in fact, I just had a really powerful session with my therapist earlier this week, and I really felt some hatred I had inside, and I was even just too ashamed to really name it, I think, up until that point, and when I went through this process with her, which was really this process we're talking about of being witnessed in a space with someone else, and just holding whatever intense emotion might be there, because hatred is within all of us.
All of us.
And, so is every other emotion, and it doesn't make us bad or wrong, and our trying to avoid it is what really creates problems. But when we can hold it and then come back to loving presence that then holds the hatred, then we can actually help it and invite it to kind of dissolve as it's ready to. And I felt the most peace after that session when I wept and I felt the hatred, and we did some tapping and just brought in loving presence, and I was like, wow, what a good reminder.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your therapy session, because I think the great point you made is that you tap into a very heavy space of pain, which is self-hatred. That's heavy. It's a hard place to go. I've been there. And you did some crying, you felt that self-hatred in your body, and after that, you felt tremendous peace. And this is the part I want to emphasize here, that it's just like I shared that peace when I feel the pain of that child in me, and I get to just feel this pure state of being in heaven. That's the same, heaven, peace. Because I really believe now, by studying, by being curious, by understanding stress, understanding what people are chasing, I think I can say, if you ask anybody who is chasing the money, who is chasing the job, who is traveling the world, they all chasing the same thing. If you really get to the bottom, which is, I want to feel peace, I want to feel freedom, I want to feel joy. And the problem is, it's still the great majority of people are chasing these things externally. And that is one of ways of describing hell.
Yeah.
When you're constantly chasing outside, it's hell, because everything is changing and moving all the time. And everybody wants certainty. And the only place we're going to find certainty and stability and safety is inside us. And that's the heaven.
Yeah.
So,
I completely agree.
So, I guess the biggest message I want to share with the audience is like, I wish for everybody to have the courage, the compassion, the curiosity to explore, because there's so much freedom on the other side, and it's a process. It's not a straight line.
Amen.
It's not like you feel self-hatred today and you're never gonna feel again.
Yeah, I woke up the next morning and I was like, oh, damn.
Yeah, and maybe you want to. The intensity changes, and we just say the relationship that we have then with the emotions change, and it becomes easier.
Absolutely. Like anything we practice.
Yeah.
And I think what I've been taught for a long time, because I got really frustrated like I was saying, that I was doing all this practice, yet I was still feeling all these same things,
The
right?
doing.
All the doing. But I had the same inner dialogue, a lot of shame, a lot of self-judgment, a lot of fear of what others thought of me, a lot of, right? And I remember talking to my mentor about it so many times, and she's like, you know, don't wait for that to change. That's not what's going to change. What's going to change over time is your response to it.
Yes.
You know, and over time we can gain more self-mastery, right? And when that happens, then it takes us longer, you know, I mean, it takes us less time to identify patterns, to bring light to patterns, to face the pain, and to kind of increase the light and kind of decrease the shadow. But we don't do it from trying to get away from it. We don't do it from striving in the opposite direction. We do it from turning and facing and being both the healer and the held.
Yeah.
You know?
Would you say today you feel self-love?
I do.
Good.
I do. And I will say it's not in all moments of the day.
Yeah.
I will say some moments of the day I might feel shame, or I might feel fear, and I get to continually practice like turning the lights back on, you know, and saying, okay, what do I do next that's going to connect me to that
Beautiful.
Loving presence, and what pain do I need to face that's maybe disconnecting me from that. But I think I have a lot more perspective, you know, and I don't stay there as long.
Yeah, that's it. We don't stay there as long. And it's what I find, the more we do this work, and the more you get to experience the physiology of being in the light, right? Because everything in this human body is all about feelings and sensations. When you really like, wow, this feels heaven, this is peace, this is freedom. And the more time you spend in that place, I found also when I'm not in alignment, the contrast is much higher too.
Yeah.
I know when I'm in hell. And it feels very severe now, because it's almost like when you live in that space of darkness and hell and you don't like yourself, it's almost like you don't notice anymore. But once you start this process of what I call the process of purification, healing the child, you get the contrast. And when I'm in that space of hell, like you said, like I catch myself, it's like, wow, I'm out of alignment here. Let me sit and explore what is the darkness trying to show me, because the darkness is a teacher. And my teacher has this saying that I really adopt, which is saying the darkness is here to serve the light. I mean, can be. The darkness can also, I find a lot of people getting way too close and intimate with darkness, and they like the darkness so much that they live there. That's not what I'm saying here. It's the contrast of seeing, feeling that darkness that we might call guilt, shame, self-hatred, anger, and go there and see what the darkness is trying to teach us. And there's always, every time I sit with darkness, some days feel really, really intense. It was only 2 weeks ago that I felt like I heard this really mean voice in my head, literally saying, "You're such a failure." So I still hear that voice at times. And I'm like, okay, now I'm able to observe and not get hijacked by that voice. And I'm like, oh, there's some darkness. And when I get to that, my last 24 hours, my last sometimes 48 hours, the other side of that, I come out with such a boost of new, fresh energy. So I'm sharing this because I think a lot of people think there's a place you arrive and it's going to be rainbows and unicorns, it's going to be amazing all the time. It's not. You're going to hit veils that is going to come in the form of, like you said, like I had some self-hatred the other day. It's like, oh, here's a veil, here's something, it's another layer for me to explore. So it's not linear. It's such a, it can be messy. It's messy at the same time, in my opinion. I wouldn't trade this journey for anything else.
Yeah, I think it's taken me a lot of years to feel that way.
Yeah.
But I think many years ago I started feeling that way, and I think then the chronic health symptoms kind of threw things for another loop, right? Of like whatever else, the other layers of things, because we never know when other stuff is going to come up in our life.
We don't.
And we get to sort of remember these things all over again when we're facing a new challenge that feels really devastating. And we get to remember, wait, I do have these skills and tools to help me navigate my way through this.
Yeah, and it does get exhausting sometimes.
Yeah.
Only I can say a week ago I was crying here because I was dealing with some fear, and there is that place of emotional exhaustion. So we need those days that you just also rest and you don't focus on doing any work. Because the other aspect I'm going to point this out, as an achiever, it's easy for me to use healing also, like I need to heal and that's the ego. So I need to be very aware with that voice that says you need to heal, versus just like, no, I just need to live life as best as I can and find the joy. Joy is my path. Anything like what gives me joy. And I'll always be sitting in this place or reading the next book about trauma or doing the next meditation that's going to take me to this higher level of heart-brain coherence and just bring playfulness back into my life. That has been that's what I'm working now, if I can share, is bring more playfulness and not take this work of healing so seriously.
I think that's such a good one. I can really use some work in that department, I think. Yeah. Because I've been much like you, in that way. And yet also it's like when we are just light sometimes, when that's what we need to do, and we are just being and we are experiencing more of that joy and that free flowingness, like, wow, do things happen to work out for us a little bit better without ourselves getting in the way? I think they do.
They do. We just have to really be vigilant every day. Not vigilant is the word, because vigilant creates anxiety. I'm going to say we need to be aware, because men, do we love getting in our own way? That's, I think,
absolutely.
It's a good place to kind of end with a question that I ask all my my new guests, which is, if you knew today was your last day on this planet, and you could leave humanity one message that you knew humanity would take as seriously, what would that message be?
Yeah, I would say go to the pain.
Go to the pain. Yeah.
And like you talked about, not in a way of collapsing into the pain, not of a way of just totally enmeshing and becoming darkness, but bringing presence to the pain.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Bring presence to the pain. Anything else that your heart would like to share before you share where people can find you?
Gosh, no, I just really, really enjoyed this. It's so rich and rare and meaningful, and I just appreciate you having me and getting to know more about you and apparently how much we have in common.
Yeah. Thank you. This was a beautiful conversation. There's much more. But one quick question before I forget. If we circle back to your physical symptoms, are you pretty much symptom free now?
In a lot of ways, I am.
Good.
Yeah, I have no more stomach problems. Nice. I have really no more women's health problems. What I have realized is that neurological and brain challenges can take the longest to heal because the nerves take the longest to heal. So I'm here drinking my celery juice, but I've healed tremendously. All symptoms, and I continue to heal elements of my brain. But like anything else, it's a daily devotion to the tools, protocols, and things that truly help me heal.
Gorgeous.
Yeah.
And the last note I want to make, this is not about just going to alternative medicine. It's just bringing all, because there's place and time for emergency treatments. There's place and time for pharmaceutical drugs. So I think it's really about combining all these technologies that we have. It's not about Western or Eastern medicine. It's about all. But really understand that the body is a process. Any illness is a process. It's not an isolated issue. So Tasha, this has been so beautiful. I love your journey. I love how we reconnected to this passion of healing and empowering people. So just tell the audience where they can find you and what offers you have.
Yeah, thank you so much. So you can find me on resilient-grace.com. That's the name of my therapeutic mentoring and holistic health coaching business. You can also find me on IG. Let me think about, what is it? Tasha.Darwent.
I will share
IG.
all your information. Everything is going to be under the notes.
And then I'm also on Facebook under Natasha Darwent. And you can feel free to reach out. We have actually a free chronic illness support group coming up. It's going to be on the first Tuesday of every month. And then I'm also starting one for mental health support. So just free resources for people that feel alone and hopeless and want to connect with community and receive some help and tools and connection.
Great. Friends, reach out. Free resources, explore, learn. If you have any condition, get curious about it. Learn everything you can about your brain or about your digestive system, about any issues that you might have. Tasha is such a great resource. So, Tasha, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure.
Thank you so
much. Many blessings,
Alex.
my sister.
Yes, same to you.